My name is Janet, and I lead the user experience team at Perforce Software. We're based in Alameda, over in the sunny and gorgeous East Bay. 70 and sunny every single day of the year. It's great. And the title of this is, What Happens When You Make Personas That Are Terrible? And it's the cost of bad storytelling, basically. It's a cautionary tale, but don't worry, there's a happy ending. So a little bit of background. My company makes version control software for the enterprise. So who here has actually heard of Perforce? Wow, some people. That's great. We are a competitor to GitHub. People here have heard of GitHub? Yeah. The company is 19 years old, so we're actually older than GitHub. We are not a startup, most emphatically. But the UX team in its current iteration is less than a year old. So we used to be absolutely part of engineering. We've had a UI designer on staff for about 12 years. But only in the last year have we moved out from under engineering and into a newly formed product strategy team as full peers to product management. So we're no longer in service to engineering. We can actually get out ahead of the product roadmap now. But historically, engineers have and do still run the show. And so in order to get clout, my team needs to gain the trust of the engineering organization. So this is some background for you guys. We used to just be the look and feel people, right? And my struggle after taking on the leadership role, I see some heads nodding, has been to get us into a place where we can actually have real influence. So I want to go back a few years, back to 2009. It was a great year. Our engineering team was building a custom content management system, similar to something like WordPress, but built on top of the Perforce versioning engine. So our versioning engine does some cool stuff. It has some unique capabilities. And we were trying to build a front end that we hoped would really disrupt the market. We were already pretty sure we were building a great product. The marketing team had done a pretty good job of opportunity analysis, looking at the competitive landscape and so on. And the development team, I think someone read Alan Cooper and said, oh, personas, that seems like a really great idea. We should go create personas. But the problem here is that a little bit of knowledge is a really dangerous thing. So the engineers said, oh, we can create personas. We're going to have Larry, Leisure Suit Larry there, our CMS user. We can have Mo, who is our systems administrator, and we can have Curly, who is a content manager. These are great personas, great personas. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. These personas were really shallow, and fundamentally, the development team made these up out of whole cloth. No big deal, right? At least we have something, right? Provisional personas, right? Something. But the problem is that the personas were really shallow. Because they weren't based in any sort of research or any sort of conversations with actual humans, they were really shallow. The team didn't do any research. The personas didn't have enough detail or aggregated data to understand real user needs. I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that that's obviously really important. And then as a result, the personas were really unhelpful for making the product or design decisions that personas are designed to do, right? The corollary to that is that the personas were forgotten, absolutely forgotten, in critical moments. Critical moments when we were trying to make decisions about the product, people said, oh, it was as if the personas never existed. When personas are good, as you all know, UX can tell good stories to developers so that the developer feedback is all about the end user, the user-centered design methodology. But the problem was that the user stories were constructed from the technology, not the persona, right? Personas were forgotten. Because of this, because everyone forgot about the personas, the user stories were constructed from the technology, the feedback that the UI team, at that time still called the UI team, received was all about aesthetic preference. I like it. I don't like it. Change this to blue. And their feedback was ultimately unhelpful, and I wanted to show you some actual samples of real user feedback, real developer feedback that I looked out in our wiki from many, many years ago, and I found these actual nuggets of real developer feedback on the design that my UI designer had created. I think this toolbar looks a bit dated. I was hoping for something less corporate with a more minimalist aesthetic. Just going to let that sink in. If you're building a content management system for an enterprise environment, what's wrong with having it look corporate? Remember, this is 2009. Design was really different then. This next one's the real kicker. In IT, administration refers to low-level stuff. The developer was referring to systems administrators. Can we change this menu item to be called management? So think about this from the perspective of like a content management user, someone who's entering content into a CMS. If they're thinking about administering their site, which of these terms are they going to really respond to? My guess is it's not management. They're probably going to think about their manager, right? That's just the way their brains work. But the developers are thinking about things from their perspective, totally forgetting about our personas. So let's look at some of the results. At the end of the day, this great content management system that we had vetted in the market, that we had marketed, I mean, just heavily. We had gone to expos, we had done white papers, we had gone all over the place with it. It utterly failed in the market. Absolutely failed. We had an installation internally for our intranet, that's great. We also had one paying customer. One. Because their personas were a huge cause of this failure, and because they were ultimately forgotten, our developers began to distrust personas as an entire concept, right? Keep in mind that the UI team was still reporting in through engineering at this time. So my team, before it became my team, was utterly reliant on getting the support of engineering to get their work done. So developers began to trust this UX best practice as a result of this. So what did we do? We created increasingly complex provisional personas because my team said, oh, well, you know, this data was just really shallow. So let's just iterate and add more data. So we created more personas, more provisional personas for this and other products, right? Real user research was not prioritized by the company. Who here's in the same boat? No? 1, 2? That's it? Wow, you guys are lucky. My hypothesis is that because we had created these increasingly complex provisional personas with more and more and more attention to detail, is that the higher up said, oh, well, we already know who we're designing for. We don't need to do research. We don't need to prioritize that. We already know. This is a cautionary tale about putting too much data into your provisional personas. Additional products failed in the market. And the cycle repeated and continues to repeat. The good news is coming later. I don't mean to depress you. So I wanted to share with you an example of one of these highly detailed provisional personas that we've created as recently as 2014. So this is Greg. He's our provisional persona. He is a Git developer. Does anyone actually know what that means? It doesn't mean what you think it means. I look at Git developer and I think about someone who works on the software called Git, right? No, they meant a software developer who uses Git as his back-end version control system, right? So the role definition was totally whack. I'm just a guy who loves to code. The user quote, I don't even know where they got that. And their feeling was that the home life and the personality should come first, because that's been emerging as a best practice to say, I want to create a narrative about this person, so that we can create user empathy. That's the whole point of personas, right? Is to create empathy within the team. But we know about this provisional persona that he likes music apps, and I forgot to include the part where he plays the ukulele on the weekends. And oh no, he's in there. There's a little bit about his technical expertise, but I want you to see just how detailed this provisional persona wound up being, right? Note that under user goals, it reads a lot like a feature list, right? It reads a lot like a feature list for our internal code review software. they got this feature list from the engineers, and they put it into the persona. Great. This is way too detailed for a provisional persona. Way, way too detailed. We were trying to tell really detailed stories about this person without any data to back it up. So I want to take a look at the main flaws. Obviously, our personas weren't data-driven. In addition to not being data-driven, our provisional personas were used and communicated within the organization because they were so detail-oriented as if they were real personas. We were trying to use them to persuade people. And the team continued to set up these really detailed provisional personas, but because they were so detailed, we continued to not prioritize research. And when we did do research, we used my favorite dirty word. We used the research to validate these provisional personas, not to prove or disprove these provisional personas. Now, I know Alan Cooper talks about validating the personas, and that's all well and good. But when we talk about validating, we often forget to say, it's okay to disprove this. It's okay to look for stuff that doesn't fit into this, that can disprove this hypothesis. So what happened, the confirmation bias was off the charts, absolutely off the charts. We wound up doing research with people who only matched these provisional personas, for example, and didn't really branch out. Additionally, our personas really focused on unimportant stuff. So here's Greg again. Like I said before, the persona goals read like a feature list. Don't do this. Like I said before, the persona titles didn't accurately reflect the job role, right? He's not actually developing on Git. He's just writing software and using Git as his version control system. And the team spent way too much effort on the lifestyle narrative. And because we did this, because ultimately we had to gain the trust and the backing of engineering at this time, and we spent way too much time on the lifestyle narrative, ultimately this made the engineers trust the personas even less, because engineers don't care whether the person plays the ukulele on the weekends. They care what feature set they're going to be using and why, right? Yeah. And then the other problem is we were trying to use these provisional personas as real personas within the organization, but these provisional personas didn't persuade anybody of anything because they weren't data-driven. Many in engineering considered our personas a joke. One time, I remember I was sitting in an all-hands, and one of the product managers came up and she tried to talk about this product we were developing and why this certain feature set as opposed to this other feature set, and she mentioned these beautiful new personas, and she said, we're designing to these personas, but I looked around during that all-hands meeting and I actually witnessed engineers rolling their eyes. This is a real thing that really happened. Fundamentally, they didn't get the point, because ultimately we were still making it up, right? Right. So I want to share with you a real quote from a real developer, and keep in mind that Perforce, my company, is absolutely engineering-centric. We've been engineering-centric since day one. I'm a former software engineer, and I direct the UX team, right? So it's a very, very engineering-centric organization. This is a real quote. Why should I trust the needs of a fake person over my own, right? Here's the kicker. This came from the CEO. What's that?
Is he also an engineer?
Yeah, he wrote the first line of the code back in the day. Yeah, it's a totally, my company is totally like an engineer builds an organization around his own code base kind of story. Yeah. He's a really interesting character. Our personas didn't create good stories. These are the real user stories that came out of some of those content management system things. Larry, one of our, Leisure Suit Larry, can comment on a page. Not, Larry would like to do X because of Y, right? Not this sort of new best practice, but these really basic feature lists that happen to have a name attached to them. Really not useful. They read like a feature list, just like the personas, right? Fundamentally, we were working from feature requirements that we had thought of and making up personas whose goals matched those requirements. Cautionary tale, don't do this. We used our personas inappropriately. Had we just used them within the product team as provisional personas to create empathy with the designers and the product managers and so on, it would have been really different. But we tried to tell stories to the cross-functional team from a fundamentally faulty premise. So the team, including ultimately the engineering team, began to make technical architecture decisions. This happened as early as this fall. They began to make technical architecture decisions about a new product that we're considering to be a critical product based on these faulty personas. This is not okay. So we had to pull the plug. And I decided to go scorched earth here. Rather than just saying, I'm going to create new personas, I said, you know what? If we create new personas, we have enough history here with the engineering team that we just need to pull the plug entirely. So we need to move forward without personas. And those of you who are UX designers may say, what the hell, right? This is scary. So what are we doing? Well, we're starting from data. The UX team is conducting intentionally open-ended research instead of research designed to validate a provisional persona. We are explicitly collaborating with engineering to look for trends in the data. Little affinity diagramming, that's Gabe. He's one of my favorite engineers, and this helps them trust the process, and it also helps them trust the eventual product as well. And so this is sort of a quick start. This is very much in progress. So this is absolutely a work in progress. You guys are some of the first people to hear about it outside the company. So we came up, based on the data, we came up with 4 basic sort of user profiles. And as we're pulling in different real people, we're placing them on this graph, sort of where they fall in this graph. Our new user profiles focus on the important stuff. So this is just a sketch that I've done of what a new user profile might look like. We are putting more effort in real estate into the actual goals, motivations, and behaviors, which is a best practice in persona development, so we can have these aggregated stories. So aggregated stories on the left. So this is our sort of sketchy, my sketchy idea of the user profile. So on the left, we list out the aggregated goals, motivations, and behaviors. But on the right here, we list out real people. Here's a real user that we can talk about with a real picture, the first and last name. And it's sort of this hybrid model, right? We're still using the sort of aggregated stuff on the left. But it was interesting. I was just reviewing About Face today about sort of how to create personas to make sure my team was all about how to do this, and we all had our brains in the right places. And Cooper talks about if people don't trust the personas, give them access to the real data. Give them access to the actual raw audio and video footage. So over here on the right side, it actually supports what I'm doing here. So I'm telling the aggregated stories on the left and the real user stories, the real actual human stories on the right from real data. Like I said, we're including info on real user research subjects, external ones. Yeah. We believe this will create a narrative around the aggregated data that engineers can trust. I've already received a lot of great feedback, even though we haven't actually done anything with this yet. This is still very much a work in progress, but whenever I talk to our engineering team about this, they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad you killed the personas. I can't wait to see what comes next. Yeah. And we also believe this will help us create better user stories for development. So what's happening? So far, so good. We are winning the respective engineering. Still in progress, like I said. Time will tell if it actually helps us build better product. We don't know. But the good news is it has at least broken the cycle of putting more and more detail into these provisional personas, thereby thinking that, you know, we don't need user research because we already have all this data. So it's at least broken the cycle. And a quick bonus of where we are today, this open-ended approach is actually helping our sales team. It's helping our sales team understand the different types of people who might be coming to us who don't fit into these narrow personas, right? So that's all I have today. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.